My name is Frank, and it is so great to be with you this morning. Whether you are watching at home, online, or you're here with us in the room, we're so glad that you're here. Now, if I started off by asking you this question, how would you respond to this question? What is the greatest comeback? The greatest comeback you have ever witnessed in your life? How would you answer that question? Greatest comeback ever. What would it be? Think about that for a minute. The greatest comeback you've ever seen. As I was thinking about this week, it's something that I reflect on, and it was a moment that we in Pennsylvania affectionately know as the Miracle in the Meadowlands. Some of you remember this, the Miracle in the Meadowlands? This big win, it's the Eagles versus the Giants for the NFC East back in 2010. The Giants were leading the Eagles in this game at 24-3 at the end of the first half. The Eagles hadn't even scored a single touchdown, just a field goal after the first half is over. And the Giants quickly wanted to get this game done, wanted to put it in the bag. And so in the third quarter, they score another touchdown. And as they approach the fourth quarter, it is still 31-10. The Eagles hadn't been able to respond but once. With only 8 minutes left in the game, having only one touchdown and a field goal, it seemed impossible for the Eagles to make a comeback and overcome that point difference. And when I went back and reviewed some of this footage this week, reliving this memory, you get to see extra and hear extra things you didn't get to hear in the actual game. And Andy Reid is trying to encourage Michael Vick, giving him a pep talk on the sidelines, and he tells Michael Vick, he's like, they're testing you right now. You're being tested. How are you going to respond? With this huge challenge to overcome. Vic then goes out on the field, throws to Brent Selleck, touchdown. Only 8 minutes left in the quarter, and he scores a touchdown right away. Then David Akers gives him a chance to score again by doing an onside kick. It was successful. Vic gets back out on the field, runs the ball all the way to the 6-yard line, and then runs the ball again in for a touchdown on his own, making it a one-touchdown game. Then as he gets back on the field, Vic runs the ball again, and then 2 more times, single-handedly bringing the team down to the Giants' 19-yard line, and then passes to Jeremy Maclin for a third touchdown. The Eagles tie up the game in this crazy sequence of events in just 8 minutes, and it's now down to a punt return. For those of you who remember Deshaun Jackson was in the field, ready to receive this punt. And as the kick flies through the air and you see Deshaun Jackson right under it, he catches the ball and then drops it. And everyone was thinking, including me in that moment watching this game, the Eagles choked again. It's over. They do all this work to get to tie up the game in this really important game, and they drop the ball and choke. But that's not what happened. Deshaun Jackson picks up the ball, stiff arms every defender, breaking tackles as he approaches the end zone, and the announcer starts screaming, game over, game over. The Eagles just pulled off the most remarkable win I've ever seen. We all love comeback stories like that, don't we? That against all odds moment when our favorite team gets back in the game and does more than just get back in the game, but comes back for a win. We all love comeback stories. And even more than watching a comeback story happen, we love being a part of a comeback story, being a part of that group or that team that's successful in a life-threatening situation, saving lives in an important response, being the player who makes the winning goal, being a part of a team or a team of leaders who rally everyone around in a big competition. But I noticed something as I began to reflect on my own comeback stories, my own personal comeback stories. Most of those moments happened when I was younger for me. Is that your case too? When I'm in my younger years. And most of those stories happened around things that, when I look back today, are kind of inconsequential. Here's what I mean. It revolved around my younger years when I was in my teens or in my early 20s, when I was in high school or those college years or my first years when I was in the Air Force, when I was a part of a team like like coming back, and here's what I mean by the inconsequential part, coming back from almost losing in a swim meet in my high school team, or coming back from some sort of athletic competition in my early 20s. And those things, while they were good, they were great experiences. They were great for camaraderie. They were great for developing a team spirit. They were great for my psyche. When I look back on them now, years later, they didn't revolve around things that had lasting impact. That's what I mean by inconsequential. They were good things. But then, at some point in my life, those comeback experiences just began to dissipate a little bit. And as the years went on, they dissipated more, eventually coming to a grinding halt. And I think if we all look back and did a little bit of a personal experience inventory, I think we'd all find that we've had a similar path in life where these experiences just don't happen anymore. And it's almost like we replace the comeback stories with something else. Something that I would call regret stories. Because it happens when we make that transition in life where all of a sudden we now have to take personal responsibility for everything that happens for us and our families. That's when that transition appeared to have occurred. And now that I am personally responsible, now all I think about are the regrets that I've had, how I didn't measure up, maybe you're here this morning and you dropped out of college and you're someone who said, you know what, I'm gonna go back to school next year. And then next year comes and you keep saying, next year. Next year for sure, but next year never comes. Or maybe your regret story is you're single, or maybe you're divorced, and every time you get into another meaningful relationship and you think this might be the one, you fail to keep it together. And every really meaningful relationship that you start just seems to fall apart. Or maybe you feel like a failure at work because every project you get into, it seems like it goes nowhere. And you're just stuck in this job that you are dissatisfied with. Or maybe you feel like you're dealing with this persistent issue in your life that won't go away, this sinful behavior that you know you shouldn't be a part of or engaged in, but it keeps pulling you back and you can't control it. Or maybe it's a parenting mistake. Maybe it's an addiction that you feel is out of control. Maybe it's a financial failure in your life. We all experience these things, and we wake up some morning and we just think, how the heck did I end up here? What is wrong with me? Why can't I get this right? What do you feel in those moments? When you start asking yourself those kind of questions? What emotions do you have to deal with? Sometimes for me, when I've experienced failures, I just feel embarrassed. Other times it's just flat out sad. Maybe a little bit of depression or anxiety will creep in when I fail. Other times, I don't know about you, but other times I have felt completely stuck when it's a big failure and I've felt like I've had a lot riding on it and I can't push through and I feel stuck, like I can't make any headway and there's no way out. We're starting a short series of teachings today that I think is very important as we're coming back from a lot that we've experienced over the last couple of years. We're coming back from a lot. And we're starting a series called The Comeback. And this is what I want everyone to understand as we kick this off today. I want you to understand and leave knowing this as we get started, that when Jesus is involved, everyone has a comeback story. No one is left behind. Everyone has a comeback story. And today I want us to start this idea out talking about failure. When you feel like you haven't been successful, how do you respond? How are Jesus followers supposed to respond to failure? Now, when we look at Jesus' disciples and this idea of coming back from failure, so often we'll take these heroes of the Bible and put them up on a pedestal and think of them as these figureheads that were perfect in every way. They could come back from anything because they didn't fail. And that's the completely wrong way of thinking about them. Jesus' followers, Jesus' closest disciples, The disciples he walked with for 3 years on this earth, they failed in numerous ways. They had doubts in big ways about even the identity of Jesus as they were walking with him and talking with him. They struggled just like we do. And today, the comeback story that I want us to look at is that of Peter, one of Jesus' closest followers. And if you want to follow along with me in the scriptures, you want to open up your Bible to Matthew chapter 26. An easy way for you to follow along is to open up our church app, hit that Bible button. That'll take you directly to today's passage. Now, as we get into this morning, let me contextualize this for you. Jesus is sitting in this moment in Matthew chapter 26 with his disciples. And as he's sitting there, they're at a table and they're celebrating the Passover. It's a meal in Jewish tradition that they have together. And this is the very same night that Jesus is about to be arrested, to be crucified. And Jesus tells one of them that's in the room at that table that they're going to betray him. And so if you've been a Christian a while, you're very familiar with this story. Who is the one who's going to betray him that was there at the table? Judas, that's right. It was Judas. And so when we think of this night, and we think of this final meal, and we think of the betrayal, we think of Judas. But what you're about to see that maybe you didn't completely recognize is that the betrayal was greater than Judas. It wasn't just Judas. Let's dive into this together. Matthew chapter 26. Look at what he says after the whole thing with Judas happens. Then Jesus tells them, this very night, what's going to happen? You will all fall away. All of you at this table. Every disciple. The betrayal is not just Judas. Every disciple is about to fall away on the account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, that's Jesus, and the sheep of the flock, that's the disciples, and the hundreds of people, some thousands of people that were listening to his teachings are going to be scattered. But after I have risen, so he's predicting his resurrection here at this table with them, I'm going to rise from the dead. And he says, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. There's still hope. I'm going to rise from the dead. All of you are going to meet me in Galilee. And then Peter replies, he's offended. He can't believe that Jesus just said, all of you will fall away. It's not just Judas. Peter says, even if all fall away, Jesus, on account of you, I never will. I'm not going to let that happen. I ain't doing it. I'm standing with you right by your side through thick and thin. It's not going to happen. Now, I want you to picture for a minute. You and I, in the room with them. Imagine with me. You and I are sitting at this table. We're among the disciples. We're sitting across the table from the most amazing teacher to ever walk the earth. This is the Messiah. And we're sitting with him. And among us are Christian legends. These are legendary Christians we're among at this table. And if we heard this whole discourse happen, where Jesus is saying, look, all of you are going to fall away. It's going to be all of you. It's not just Judas that's going to betray me. You're all going to lose it. And Peter pipes up, and we've been with them for 3 years. We're at this table with them, and Peter says, no way, I ain't going. I'm going to be with you through the whole thing. Would you believe it if we were there? I think I'd believe him. I think I would, if you and I were sitting there together and I heard Peter speak up. This is Peter. This is the one who had been with Jesus from the beginning. Jesus recruited Peter first. He was a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. He was recruited first among all the disciples. I think I'd believe him. But Jesus knew something more. Jesus had a supernatural knowledge, being the Son of God, being God incarnate, God on earth. He knew that Peter was not going to follow through on his claim. Look at how Jesus responds to Peter's remark. He calls him out in front of everyone. He says, Peter, truly I tell you, this is directly to Peter, this very night before the rooster crows, not just once, Peter, you're going to disown me 3 times. It's not going to happen just once, 3 times. And then Peter declares, no. Jesus. I can't believe he's talking back. That's what shocks me. He's sitting in front of his master teacher. This is the Messiah who's telling him that this is going to happen. And Peter's like, no. I mean, how often do you tell God you think you know? And that's exactly what Peter's doing. He's doing exactly what we do. Even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. Peter says, it's not going to happen, Jesus. And look at the other disciples. All of the other disciples say the same. They hear Peter going back and forth with Jesus. They're like, yeah, we're with Peter. We're not going to let it happen, Jesus. None of us are really going to do it. We're not going to let that happen. Peter makes this massive claim. It's not going to happen. I think I'd believe him. Not only was Peter close to Jesus, but James and John were also close. These three guys were Jesus' tightest followers. And Peter was so significant among them that Jesus named him the Rock, and later said that Peter was going to be the one to be the foundation of the church. And he went on to do that. As part of his comeback, he went on to do that, leading the church in Jerusalem. Shortly after this meal, Jesus is then arrested. He's taken from them, and let's move down to verse 69 and look at what happens to Peter. And it ends up being just, you know the story, it ends up being just as Jesus predicted. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. This is after Jesus has been taken away, and a servant girl comes up to him. And he says, you also were with Jesus. They just arrested Jesus. You were with them. You were with Jesus of Galilee, she said. And look at how Peter responds. He denied it before them all. That means it wasn't just the girl who called him out. And this girl was probably someone who worked for a wealthy family who lived near the temple. And so, of course, she would have recognized him because she would have seen Jesus and the disciples over that 3-year period going to the temple in Jerusalem on a regular basis. And so as she witnesses this, she recognizes Peter walk by and calls him out and says, yeah, you were with Jesus. Now, we don't know why she was asking him this question. She may have had a question about Jesus or his teachings. There could have been some other reason for her answer, but we never get to find out because Peter immediately denies it because he's worried not just about her, he's worried about all the others who are watching. How often do we fall into that trap? That we care more about what everyone else thinks of us instead of the things that are most important to God. He denies it. And so that is the first denial that Jesus had predicted, and it happened just as Jesus said it would. We go on to verse 71, and then he went out to a gateway. So he leaves the courtyard, he goes through this other gateway, and another servant girl sees him, who again probably worked for another family that lived fairly close by, and says, oh, this person was with Jesus. This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth. And he denies it again, but this time he denies it with an oath. And what that means is he was saying, look, I swear, I don't know this guy. I don't know the man. I swear it. He's denying it like in a legal way, like we would deny it, or like we would make a truth claim in a court of law. You go to court and you say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, as a witness and nothing but the truth, right? That's the way that Peter is responding now. He's saying, look, I'm swearing to you in the most legal sense, in the most truthful sense I can say, but he lies about it and denies that he knows Jesus a second time. The third time happens, verse 73, we go on, and it says, after a little while, those standing there are people nearby as he makes the second denial. They approach Peter and they say, surely, Peter, you're one of them. Your accent gives you away. See, Peter, we know he was from Galilee, as Jesus was. He was a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. That's how Jesus met him. And so they knew what a Galilean sounded like. It'd be like me questioning that you were from Philly, but I heard you say "yous guys." So I know you're from this area. Or it'd be like hearing a southern accent and knowing, oh, you're not from the northern part of our country, you're from down south. That's what Peter's experiencing. They're like, dude, your accent, it gives you away. And then he began to call down curses. And he swore to them, I don't know the man. I don't know who he is. Now, when it says he calls down curses, Peter's not cussing or swearing or using foul language. He's calling down curses in a superstitious sense. Like he is saying, look, if I'm lying to you, may God strike me dead with a lightning bolt. And then if it doesn't happen, you know that I'm telling you the truth. He's calling down a curse in a superstitious sense. And then he realizes it. Because what happens next is the rooster crows. Immediately a rooster crows, and Peter remembered the words of Jesus that he had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And what does Peter do? He weeps. His master that he swore his allegiance to, he had failed him. And he weeps bitterly, it says. Now, there are a couple of things we can learn from Peter's experience. And the first thing that we can learn is, look, everyone has a failure story. I've got them. You've got them. The champions of the scriptures, the heroes of the Bible, the disciples who we all look up to, they've got them. Paul, the one who wrote the majority of the New Testament, he's got them. We all have failures. Famous people in our culture have failures. Thomas Edison, the guy who invented the light bulb, he said, I have 10,000 of them. Except he had a little different spin on it. He said, I haven't failed. I just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And maybe Thomas Edison is onto something. Maybe we need to shift our perspective about failure, because even though everybody has them, it's what we do in those failures that change us, mold us, and shape us. It's what we do with our failures that matter. Let me again place this whole experience that Peter has in context. This happened right before Jesus was crucified. He's about to be murdered on the cross, and he's telling his followers, his closest followers, these disciples, that they're all going to betray him. They're all going to fail, and they're going to disown him. But at the same time, he also gave them hope. Do you remember when I read this phrase? I'm going to go ahead of you into Galilee. He's saying, look, you're all going to disown me. You're all going to fail, but I'm not quitting on you, and you're not quitting on me. I'm going to go ahead of you into Galilee. We're going to meet up again. There is hope, even in the middle of your failure. And some of us, friends, we have these spiritual failures that we've been carrying. We have these physical failures we've been carrying, this emotional baggage. And we need to remember that there's hope. We don't have to quit on it. We can still push ahead through our failure, and that is the hope that Jesus was giving them. He's saying, look, we're going to meet again, and it's going to be in Galilee after I've risen from the dead. Jesus knew that they were going to fail and that they were going to be under incredible pressure. But even in the middle of that, Peter still responded with this level of arrogance and said, no, I'm not going to quit on you. Even if I have to die, I'm going to be there for you. And that's because Peter needed to grasp this second point that failure teaches us. And it teaches us that failure is also about the lessons that we can learn in the middle of it. The lessons that we can learn in failure that success simply cannot teach us. Look again at how Peter responded to this failure. He remembers this word that Jesus gave him before the rooster crows, you're going to disown me. And he goes outside and weeps. When I read that, I can't help but ask myself this question. What if Peter hadn't failed? What if he pushed through and stayed committed to Jesus and didn't quit? Not just 3 times, not 1 time. If all 3 temptations he stood up and said, yes, I'm with him. Can you imagine after the resurrection, the level of arrogance that Peter might have? I was the only one who stood by Jesus. I got this, guys, follow me. Instead of follow him. It might have been a completely different Peter. God knew, Jesus knew, that Peter had to experience failure in order to grow in a set of character qualities that he desperately needed. Character qualities like humility and patience and empathy. Things that are only grown in the middle of those failure struggles that can be grown nowhere else. So what lessons do you learn? What lessons do I learn from failure? I think one of them is that we learn not to take ourselves so seriously. We learn not to just focus on who we are. We learn not to take ourselves so seriously. We don't focus on who we are, we focus on others in addition to ourselves. And we also learn that life is more than what we personally achieve. It's not just about what I can do. And failure also teaches us that there are ways that we can grow in our character. Often success, especially personal success, can puff up our egos in a way that change us in a negative aspect. When I think of failure in Pennsylvania, where we all live now, it brings back a recent memory that I had out down in Hershey, PA. When I first got back just a couple of years ago, after being gone from this area for about 8 years, my family and I went out to Hershey. We went to Chocolate World. We took our kids down there. Maybe you've been there. And this is a picture of us down in Hershey's Chocolate World, and we're about to make and design our own candy bars. Have you ever done this there? They have this cool thing and this machine that you can design your own Hershey's bar, and you can add any kind of candy you want to the chocolate mixture. Do you want white chocolate? Do you want dark chocolate? Do you want milk chocolate? And not only that, you could decide what the texture of the candy bar is going to be. What do you want it topped with? It's a really cool thing. And then there's these machines put it together and they package it for you at the end in this really cool looking package. If you haven't done it, it's such a great experience. But while we were there, we also took this tour and we hopped on this tour bus trolley kind of thing. And this guide took us through all of Hershey and the city and the Hershey property. And we got to hear about Milton Hershey, the founder of the company. And what's interesting about Hershey is before he started the Hershey Chocolate Company, he was a nobody. He was a nobody in the business too. His first career move was to take an apprenticeship at a print shop. He starts this career as a printer. He does this apprenticeship, and shortly after taking the job, he's fired. He goes on to start his first candy company. The candy company starts growing, and he blows it. It goes belly up, total failure. He starts a second candy company. He's got 2 failures under his belt now. First one with the print shop, second one with his first candy company. He starts another candy company, blows it up, it goes nowhere. So he's failed 3 times now. And it's not until he goes out toward Lancaster and starts the Lancaster Caramel Company, and he starts to get it right. After 3 massive failures, that company eventually turns into the Hershey Chocolate Company that we know today, and becomes the most well-known name in the candy industry. Everybody has a failure story, but it's what we do in response to those failures that matters. Are you going to allow yourself to be transformed? Are you going to allow God to participate in your failure and help grow your character so that you can become the person he desires you to be? Or are you going to stay stuck? Listen to what Milton Hershey said about his failures prior to starting his company. He said this: you can surmount failure. You can be battered, down 3 times as I was, and still come out on top. I failed 3 times because I had not taken the time to get all the facts. After that, I learned my lesson well. question is so very important. Everyone fails, especially before they succeed. But what have you learned? Peter learned to listen to Jesus and went on to become the foundation of the church in Jerusalem that eventually spread around the world. How are you going to allow failure to impact your character? See, because it's our response in these moments that are going to make us better the next time around. Not just Peter failed, Moses failed, David failed, countless others. You and I are no different. Maybe, just maybe, your most recent failure is simply God teaching you to learn something and to be ready for that next challenge that you will face. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much. I thank you for what you are doing in us as we experience challenges and have to face our failures. God, I thank you for what you're doing through us as a church family, as we get to impact others with this message of hope that you would have for your world. God, be with us this week in every decision and in every conversation and in every experience, including the ones in which we fail. Help us to respond in a way that assists us in growing in character. In Jesus' name.